a date which will live in infamy.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbiville. LeRoy Balmain was in boot camp at Catalina Island when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. As a merchant marine and later in the Air Force, he did not see combat duty, but served his country first as a fireman aboard the SS Alfred C. True, and then eventually as an administrative supervisor. He and his wife Marita were married in 1946, and his assignments took them from Alaska to Topeka to Alabama to Washington, D.C., to Shreveport, to the Philippines, and finally back to the States, and in 1972 to Bryan, where he served 4 years as an Air Force recruiter. After he retired from the service, he spent 19 years as executive director for the Better Business Bureau here. So you see his entire adult life has been one of service. So please welcome LeRoy Balmain to Veterans of the Valley. LeRoy, thank you for being here, and thank you first for your service. I appreciate your service and your long duty in the Air Force. I know it was an interesting time in your life, and obviously one that you're proud of, right?
I am most proud of the service that I have given to our country and to our local community.
Exactly.
It gives you a good, warm feeling, you know, to do something like that.
Right. Well, you know, that's kids growing up and graduating from high school in the 40s and around the war and all, and that's what they did. There was an era of patriotism that went through everybody back then.
Many of my friends, that's what caused me to want to go into the military. As young as I was. Everybody else was going, and I thought I needed to go and help do what I could do.
Indeed.
And that's the reason why I went in at the age of 17 then.
In 1945, and you entered the Merchant Marines. I believe you might be the first veteran that I've had on that I know of that was in the Merchant Marines. Talk about that and why you went that route initially.
Okay, I wanted to go into the service, but my parents would not sign the papers for me to go. So I finally came up with the Merchant Marines, and they were convinced then that they would go ahead and sign the papers, and I entered the Merchant Marines.
Indeed. And like I said in the beginning, you were at Catalina Island in boot camp actually when the hostilities ended with the dropping of the bomb in August of 1945. So that kind of, I guess, changed your direction as far as what you were going to be doing.
Well, yes, I was already obligated to serve in the Merchant Marines when the bomb was dropped. So I was at Catalina Island receiving my boot training, and from there I left and went to Japan.
Right.
The ship that I was on left San Pedro, California, and went down through the Panama Canal up to New Orleans, and we loaded the ship with supplies that the military would need over there, tanks and trucks and groceries to eat, so forth like that. So we left New Orleans and went to down through the Panama Canal again, and then 49 days later we arrived in Japan.
49 days, that's quite a trip, quite a roundabout way to get from California to Japan, through New Orleans.
Those old ships wasn't made to go very fast, you know.
Exactly. Now, I stated that your job was as a fireman. That's not the traditional description of the word fireman. You kind of kept the boilers going and kept the ship going in the right direction. Right?
We kept the steam up to the maximum, so the ship would go as fast as it could, you know. And my job was to make sure that that everything was okay in the engine room.
Right.
So that was my job.
That was your job. And this whole experience was quite a deal for a young kid from Hooks, Texas, who'd never even seen the water before, right?
I mean, there was more water out there than I thought.
Yeah. You had an idea there was a lot out there.
Yeah, I had an idea that there was some there, but I didn't realize there was so much, you know, because being the first time I'd seen the ocean.
Right, right. Now this was the Alfred C. True was the ship that you were on. That was a merchant vessel.
That was
right. I tried to find a picture of the Alfred C. True, but I couldn't find a picture of it. I think you said
it was decommissioned and then sold for salvage. So it may be something else now.
Yeah,
No telling why.
It's probably scattered out everywhere by now. The ship, though, had a duty in Japan, and when you all got there, talk about when you got there.
We arrived in Yokohama, Japan, and then went on down to a place by the name of Kure, K-U-R-E, Japan, is where we unloaded our cargo.
Right.
And then once we were unloaded, we went back to Yokohama, and that was when they removed us crew members and put a Japanese crew aboard to ferry their people back from the islands back to the mainland. And we came back to the States as passengers on another cargo ship.
I see.
That was coming back over here.
I see. That's fascinating how, you know, we fought the war against the Japanese, but then once the war was over, then we served in sort of helping them get back home as part of the occupation duty.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
It is.
Indeed, that is basic. So you came back home and from the islands, March of 1946, and you went back to Hooks, Texas, right, for a while?
Went back to Hooks, Texas, and visited with my family for a while, and then the draft board told me that they was going to draft me then. They were drafting at the age of 18, and I just couldn't imagine getting drafted, you know, so I beat them to it. I went down and joined.
Yeah.
And was sworn into the Air Force on August the 3rd, 1946.
1946. It was the Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps. Wore the brown shoes back then, you know. And it was not the Air Force until later on in 1947.
Why the Air Force? Did you have initial designs on being a flyer or being in the air, or were you mainly looking for maintenance, or what were you looking for?
I was looking for a job in supply or something like that, you know, why I went to the Army Air Corps route.
Right.
And I got in there, and then it became a separate service, and I received training in something else, and then I pursued that, you know.
Indeed. 22 years you were in the Air Force, and we'll talk about that career. After basic, you were sent to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois as a telephone lineman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Climbing the poles, stringing the wires for, and it's a long way up those poles too. It's a lot faster coming down than it is going up.
But you didn't have designs on climbing poles the rest of your career,
No, I
right?
didn't. And when they called me in and said Alaska was my choice of a station to go to overseas, you know, after basic and tech training. So I went to, was assigned to Alaska, and they called me in and wanted to know what I could do, and I told them that I was one of the best typists they'd ever seen. And that way I got into typing career, and I knew that they'd have to have that typewriter in a warm place, you know, for it to operate.
Right. So, and if you were where the typewriter was,
if I was the
then you were in a
operator,
warm
I
place.
wanted to be warm.
And you told them you were an expert typer because you'd taken 6 weeks of typing in
I
high school, right?
had 6 weeks
Well, that made you an expert.
Yeah.
And they didn't need pole climbers in Alaska, so.
No, they didn't need pole climbers, but they needed clerk typists.
So you were clerk typist at the time. It was Ladd Air Base, is that
Ladd
right?
Air
In
Base,
Alaska? In Alaska?
In Fairbanks, Alaska.
I see, which is Fort Wainwright, I believe you
Fort
told me.
Wainwright now.
Told me now. And the mission of that group up there was flying weather missions over the. Tell us about that mission.
Well, it was we flew B-29s, and it was weather missions up over the North Pole, and you have to leave the engines going a long time to keep them from freezing up, you know.
Right.
So that was a very interesting too.
Right. Now you've been married in 1946, in December of 1946, and after a while that you were in Alaska, your wife Marita was able to join you there. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. She came up and joined me and got a job working on the base as in the weather office as a secretary.
I see.
And worked there for a couple of years, you know, or a year and a half that she was up there.
Matter of fact, we have a picture right now of. There is the young LeRoy and Marita.
Yeah, we were 18 years old when that picture was taken.
Wow.
And we're still together.
How about that? Well, 60 years, 1946, 62 years, or
64 years.
64 years.
64 years.
Well, what a wonderful story. And you were fortunate in that you were able to serve your entire 22 years, just about the whole time with you all together, because she was able to
Yes, we were.
follow you from assignment to assignment.
I can't remember a time that we did not travel at the same time to another base.
Right.
In all the time that we were in.
Right. Topeka, Kansas, Forbes Air Force Base, and that's where you were discharged in 1946 before you re-enlisted. Right?
August 3rd, 1946, I was discharged at Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas, and we came to Hooks and visited our families for a few days and went on to Montgomery, Alabama, and re-enlisted in the Air Force at Maxwell Air Force Base.
Now, was that a decision that you all had always made, that you were going to re-enlist, or were you thinking about staying retired?
We left it open both ways. You know, we didn't know whether we would get work in civilian life or stay in the military.
Right.
So we enjoyed our first 3 years, so we decided we'd try it again. And we re-enlisted at Maxwell, and from there on it was working on my 20 years.
Exactly. 2-3 years at Maxwell, wing inspector. In the wing inspector division.
I was with the wing inspector's office, and it was our responsibility to inspect organizations to make sure that they were operating under the proper orders and technical orders and so forth, you know.
Right.
And that was, my job was to make sure all the technical orders were up to date and so forth like that.
Then your next assignment was Washington, D.C. in the Air Force Officers Program in Atomic Energy. What can you tell us about that?
Air Force Office for Atomic Energy, I worked for a civilian who has passed away now. He's Dr. William D. Early. I worked for him. And that was a job that lasted, I guess about 2 or 3 years. And I cannot go in detail on some of my
That's what's called
jobs.
a special assignment.
Yeah, it's a special assignment.
You noted that in your 22 years service of the Air Force, you didn't the majority of that, you actually were not on a military base, right?
In my 22 years, I was only on an Air Force base for 10 years.
For 10 years, right, right. Including your last assignment here in Bryan, which we'll talk about in a minute. Left Washington in 1950 and then to Shreveport, Louisiana, which wasn't far from home in Hooks, Texas, right?
Very close to home. I was assigned to Bossier Base as an administrative specialist, and worked in the plant where we worked on the material that we were charged with, and that lasted what, 5 years, I guess.
About 5 years. And then from Shreveport, Louisiana to the Philippines.
To the Philippines.
And I noted that you didn't serve in combat, but you must have felt that way when you were flying to the Philippines. Tell that story about the flight, because you were with Marita and your 2 young children at the time. I think you said Gary was 9 and Debbie was 5. And talk about the flight to the Philippines.
Okay, we went by way of Hawaii, and of course, our daughter got airsick in Hawaii, and her mother had to take her in and clean her all up, you know. And then we got closer to Guam, was our next stop, and the plane was on fire, and you could see a flame coming out of the engine, and we were beginning to land, and here come all of the ambulances and fire engines and so forth like that, you know, and scared a bunch of people a little bit, but
a little bit, yeah.
we got off that plane and got on another one and started on into Guam, and the plane lost an engine, and we had to jettison the fuel and come back into Guam. And
this was the second plane. It
lost an engine. It lost an engine.
Right.
Then we.
Did you think about taking a boat then?
We were looking closer at a boat.
Another mode of transportation.
Another mode.
Yeah, you couldn't drive.
But we came in, and they had kept us overnight.
Right.
And during the night, they fixed the original plane that we had come in on. So the next morning, we got back on that plane with all of our luggage and stuff that we had to tote around, and then we flew on into the Philippines and landed at Clark Air Base the next day.
Now, you were assigned to the Air Attaché office there, and it was really, you didn't wear uniform in this position. Talk a little bit about your job. That was interesting. You were a liaison between the U.S. Air Force and the Philippine Air Force.
That's correct. That was our job, and again, my position was as the administrative supervisor for the Air Attaché office, and we served for a little over 3 years on that assignment, and our children became acquainted with what a embassy is. A lot of people don't get that chance to serve in an embassy.
Right.
But they learned a lot. In fact, my son just commented the other day of how much he remembered about it. You know,
right,
and so
right.
forth like that.
Well, you went over there, he was 9. I guess you left and he was 12, so he would remember a lot. And even Debbie, as young as she was,
yeah,
she probably recalls
Debbie
a
and
lot.
I had lunch together today, and she was telling me some of the things that she had remembered, such as the school building had been used as a prison for some of the people that during the Japanese occupation.
Right, right, right. You left the Philippines in I guess the late 50s, early 60s. Went to Dayton, Ohio, for an assignment there with Strategic Air Command, right?
What was the name of at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Yeah, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And we served there for a tour of duty. And with the bomb squadron of B-52s, KC-139s.
I see.
And then we left there, and I came to school at Lackland Air Force Base for recruiting duty.
Right.
And they trained me to be a recruiter, and then I served. We had 6 counties that we was responsible for.
Right. You were assigned to Bryan, and you.
But my duty station was here in Bryan. That's where I lived.
And I think you said your office was actually in downtown Bryan,
Yeah,
where the federal building is now, or in the post office.
Where the federal building. We had the building downstairs.
Right.
And several times you hear people running down the steps, you know, and they'd come in and ask to be enlisted into the military.
Talk more about that duty, because this was a time in the early '60s. Vietnam was going then. Lyndon Johnson was in office. Vietnam was really the hot spot, and you were here at a college town. To talk about the challenges of recruiting there. You said it was one of the most difficult jobs that you had because of the quotas you were required to.
It was a difficult job, and a lot of the guys could not take it. You know, there's a lot of pressure on somebody because you're given a quota of we were responsible for nurses and a special type of women Air Force. You get a quota for a woman, and they don't go in as much as the men do, you know. So it's more difficult to get what you're assigned if you have a woman or if you have a nurse or something like that, you know.
Right.
And but out of the 3 years that I was on recruiting duty, I was fortunate enough to be number 3 in the Air Force all 3 years that I was on recruiting duty.
Number 3 in the nation, right?
Yeah.
Number 3 in the country.
3.
So you were obviously pretty good at it, and that being here in what at that time was certainly a rural area. You had a 6-county
very
region.
rural, and but when the draft is looking at you, you know, and it's that helps them make up their mind easier, you know.
Indeed, yeah, I guess so. You retired in 1968 from the service after 22 years. You went to Lufkin for 4 years in the insurance business, but then you came back to Bryan in February of 1972. You took over as executive director of the Better Business Bureau and stayed there for 19 years, and that was an interesting job, obviously.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Being a new bureau. I had heard about the job from the guy that run the Chamber of Commerce, and I applied for the job and was hired to be the executive director for the next 19 years, you know.
Right. And the nature of the job was very similar to it is now. You were looking out for businesses and for the consumer and people that wanted to take your money for not good reasons, and so it was essentially the same kind of thing that they're doing now.
That's right. They're still doing it, and they'll be doing it next year.
Exactly. Matter of fact, I believe you told me that you used to go on radio stations and TV stations and report about people to look out for and things like that. You said that you'd even been in this studio before.
Yes, I was in this studio. Mrs. Colson, was that?
Sharon Colson,
Sharon
who still
Colson.
does
I've been on her
the magazine
program.
show here at KAMU. Yeah.
Long time ago. Time goes by in a hurry.
You were here in your capacity as with the Better Business Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's fascinating. And you retired in 1989.
1989.
1989 that you've been retired, and I know you're very active now in the with the American Legion and other groups and things like that. So you and Marita like to stay busy.
We do, but we're beginning to slow down. You know, after once you get in your 80s, you begin to slow down a little bit.
Right. Talk about your family. You have a son, as we mentioned.
I have
and
a son
daughter.
who is employed by the city of College Station as he's superintendent of the roads and drainage of the city, and then our daughter is a school teacher, and has retired once, but is back teaching again now. So
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think you said you had 4 grandkids?
I have 4 grandchildren. One of them, by the way, is a graduate of Texas A&M. He's a mechanical engineer with NASA.
Wow.
We have our other grandson has got 14 years in the Air Force. He's a career man. And then I have a granddaughter that's a school teacher here. She's bilingual, teaches bilingual. And then our other little granddaughter, who is a Downs, lives at Down Home Ranch in Elgin.
I see.
And that's my 4 grandchildren.
All of which you...
And then I got some great-grandchildren.
I wish we had time to go into them, but when they grow up, we'll talk about their careers and all that. LeRoy, thank you very much for your service, and thank you for being with us. It's a fascinating career.
Pleasure.
We appreciate
My pleasure.
it. LeRoy Balmain's generation was one where service just came naturally, as did patriotism. Leaving home and joining the military was just something that young kids did when you got out of high school in the 1940s. LeRoy Balmain joined when he was 17 out of Hooks, Texas. We salute him for his long service in the Air Force and then for nearly 2 decades of his service to his community. I'm Tom Turbiville. Be sure and join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.